Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
Hey everyone, David, Mike, and not Greg here this morning with the Near Memo episode. Mike, what was it? 179?
179, yes.
Yeah.
179. Yeah, Greg is in Croatia.
Greg is flying back from the Cinda conference in Croatia where he presented our joint research with Cinda on search behavior in Europe for consumers looking for kitchen remodeling professionals, and we will certainly be discussing that at some future juncture on the Near Memo. But we'll give Greg a well-earned week off, and just you're stuck with the two of us for this episode. Mike was fortunate enough to attend the Apple announcement yesterday about a slew of new features, not just with Apple Maps, but other sort of Apple business-related features as part of Apple Business Connect. And I'll be talking, we'll both be talking about it, but I'll sort of tee up the Bright Local study this week around the directories that rank sort of on a categorical basis, and kind of why I thought that was interesting and some of the takeaways from that. So Mike, why don't you lead us off with with your summary of the press event yesterday and kind of what the implications are.
So the big news was that Apple Business Connect is expanding eligibility beyond just bricks and mortar to any business. Could be e-commerce, could be a work-at-home business, could be a service area business. You have to go through a similar Apple verification process to use Apple Business Center, but you will now be included in that. And it's a very nice, as you pointed out in the past, it's a very nice interface. The interface requires that the business do the listing, and then if they want to share it with an agency, they can. An agency, unless you're a large company like that has an API relationship with Apple, the agency can't generate the listing for you. So that's a sort of impediment to very small businesses because they have to drive through the process. But once you're in there, then Apple lets you add your logo and they verify that you really exist, that sort of thing. And they promise in their press release that any verified business, quote, can now create a consistent brand and location presence across apps that customers use every day, including Apple Maps, Wallet, and Mail. That's a little bit overstated. The reality is that bricks and mortar businesses will not be showing on maps, but they will be showing in a range of new areas. The new Mail, when they get categorization in iOS 18.1, will show your branded, trusted brand logo in Mail. Apple Pay will show, instead of just showing generic pay information, will show, if you do tap to pay, will show your brand. And going forward, they're going to do it with SMS as well, and at some point in the distance, Mac Mail as well. So essentially, it's about a brand and trust within the Apple ecosystem. So I think Apple is really smart to be doing this. One, they're developing a direct relationship with real brands, no matter how small or how big, and they're then displaying that trusted brand information back to their ecosystem, so that a user on Apple can have some faith that the email that they got, that the Apple Pay and the SMS they got are from legitimate organizations, which is a huge issue on Google, right? You have no idea who's been hijacked, who hasn't, which brand is real, which brand is fake, which one is run by a criminal gang, So I think Apple is leveraging their network for the benefit of building brand and trust for the business and for the benefit of their users and for developing a direct relationship. All very smart moves. It's not an SEO marketing play. That being said, I went back and checked 2 locations year over year comparisons on calls, driving directions, and website clicks from Google versus Apple to get a sense of how much they are sending to bricks and mortar. And in storage, which is really more recovery, I think, than discovery, but still 23% of the driving directions came from Apple. 57% of the driving directions came from Apple. 23% of the calls and 4% of the website clicks came from Apple. Those are big numbers, much bigger than we saw last year when we did that analysis. So it implies to me that people are using Apple Maps more for both recovery and discovery. In Barbara Oliver Jewelry, she gets about 33% of her driving directions. and which I think reflects the Buffalo market pretty accurately in terms of market share from Maps versus Google Maps. But she gets 8% of her calls and 6% of her web visits. So not an insignificant amount. Certainly in the scheme of opportunities, it's probably the second biggest opportunity regardless of your business.
Right.
More important in some verticals than in others.
Which Greg pointed out yesterday, or I guess it was this morning's newsletter, middle of the night U.S. time, that it really is becoming, if not has been for a couple of years, the second most important horizontal platform anyway, to market your business. I had a couple questions for you, Mike. So the first one, I guess, is, regarding trust and sort of Apple leveraging its network. Do you get a sense that this is yet another sort of payoff of Apple's very focused, to many critics, to sort of closed loop messaging system, which they've had a very strong sort of vision for since day one, and in comparison, Google's, colossal sort of mouse wheel of starts and failures and starts and failures and starts and failures with messaging. Do you think that this sort of leveraging the trust of SMS messages is this an existing benefit, or is this Apple sort of sort of looking ahead as sort of another moat that they can build with their messaging system?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is another moat. I mean, the question I had that I didn't ask and I should have is, would it show up across RCS, for example? Like if you're would a Google user be able to see that an Apple brand, Apple Business Center brand is branded in it when it comes out to SMS? Now, SMS is further down the pike, or Apple Message is further down the pike, right? Initially it's going to be Mail and Apple Pay with messaging, somewhere down the pike. But I see it as creating an envelope of trust within the walled garden, right? So everybody that's in the walled garden can have an increased level of trust. So I think that in itself is a moat of some sort that only Apple could create. That Google can't create that level of trust that this vendor really has been vetted by Apple and has some little more merit than some other vendor that hasn't been, or that this email is to be more trusted, or that this phone call. And it's also going to show up in at some point in the phone app, that this is this call isn't just a generic call. It's from Mike Blumenthal, right? And with my logo. So I think it is a moat, but it's also a significant benefit to the consumer that I, as a consumer, want to know I'm dealing with trustworthy businesses. So you got to give Apple credit for playing the game smartly.
Yeah, what's interesting, just thinking about this, you brought up Mail. I mean, Gmail and associated Google Workspace accounts, surely must be able to do the same thing if Google really put its mind to it. I mean, Gmail must be the largest mail processor, maybe second to Apple, whatever Exchange Microsoft Exchange, whatever they call that. But it seems like that the data is there to sort of leverage for, increasing trust signals, and Google just hasn't done it. I mean, they're just, as we've talked ad nauseum on previous podcasts, that just don't seem to have the resources or the product vision on the sort of Google business profile side of things. So
one area where I think Apple is falling down is in tap to pay, that the iPhone itself no longer requires an extra device to process through a payment processor. You can just tap two iPhones if the vendor is set up, without a Stripe box or a Square box or a PayPal box attached to the phone. And you can do that. But that's a benefit mostly to like farmers markets and remote things. And those are the least sophisticated users that are really at a disadvantage. And unless their payment processor encourages them to use tap to pay. Now, from a payment processor's perspective, it's a little cheaper because you don't have to send out a dongle. But from a lock-in perspective, it would open up different payment processors that I think they might be resistant to do that. So unless the payment processors are encouraging the farmer market to go to tap to pay, Apple isn't doing anywhere near enough to get tap to pay, so they could just have a phone with not having to swipe the card, all that sort of stuff. Apple isn't doing anywhere near enough to make that successful, which I think is a shame because it's a brilliant thing, right? I mean, for these very small vendors.
the other question I had for you is, I know that you see this primarily not as a search marketing play, and that service area businesses aren't going to show up in Apple Maps. But do you think that it signals anything about Apple's sort of broader search, theoretical rollout that's been theoretical for years now, in terms of surfacing these businesses and things like Spotlight search and that sort of thing with a little more oomph than has maybe historically been possible?
Yeah, I thought a lot about it, and certainly Spotlight search is one they mentioned. The other is advertising, right? For service area businesses, for example, in Maps makes sense. So I think I think it is part of a bigger plan. Apple never just does things for now; they're always doing things for 5 years from now, and they have a lot of patience. So the answer to that is, I think yes. I don't quite know how, but I could see the situation you pointed out. I could see Maps advertising. They're developing relationships. They claim to have millions of businesses worldwide. That's not a very big number. It's somewhere between one, something more than one and less than 10, right?
Certainly just based on the API partners in their announcement, they've got to have, 20, 30 million businesses.
Yes.
So yeah.
DAC, Rio, Sochi, Uber, and Yext.
Right.
They have all of the big brands and a lot of smaller brands. And that really, I think for most small businesses, probably the easiest way for them to interact with Apple and the data and just see whether they're being successful there. Yeah. But the interface is clean and neat, and it's easy to get verified. But like I said, small agencies don't have a place in this picture unless you're partnering with one of these list companies.
Yep.
So.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.